Hello, good morning, America. Good afternoon, Europe, Africa, and good evening, Asia and Australasia. Welcome back to the Isrrt Facebook Live. I am Napapong Pongnapang, the Vice President for Asia and Australasia. I will be your host for today's event. This is our second collaborative Facebook Live together with FujiFilm, Asia Pacific Healthcare Learning Academy. And we had a very successful first episode, and we are so happy to continue with Mr. Dennis Bowman for the second episode. But before we start, I would like to invite President Donna Newman to have a speech for opening the event for today. Donna.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for our second session of our Learning Academy with Fuji. We could not do these types of meetings and education without the support from our corporate sponsors, and we thank Fuji for doing this. And more importantly, we could not do these without our experts from around the world. Thank you, Dennis, my fellow colleague from California, for taking time to come and share your knowledge with our members from around the world. We look forward to more of these episodes, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to share with our members around the world. So I'm going to turn the meeting back over to Napapong, and I look forward to hearing what you have to teach us about adaptive radiology. Thank you for your time, Dennis.
Thank you, Donna. And I would like to introduce Dennis Bowman just a little bit. I'm sure that a lot of us already watched the first episode. Dennis is a technologist based in California, and he is the content creator for computer radiography and digital radiography for the 13th edition of Murrow Atlas of Radiographic Positioning and Procedures. And he is also the co-author of Adaptive Radiography with Trauma, Image Critique, and Critical Thinking. So today's episode will be our second episode on adaptive radiography. And now we have Dennis Bowman with us. Dennis, now the time is yours.
I'm really excited to have you guys all see this talk today. It's a real fun one. Last one was kind of a heavier one with digital and fluoroscopy, where this one is really just all about positioning, tricks of the trade from, and so it's just sort of my highlight favorites from the book. So I guess with that, I'll see you at the end and I'll be able to answer any questions that you have.
All right, thank you.
I'll never stop seeing my patients as my #1 priority. It's the reason I come to work every day.
I'll never stop putting my patients first because I see them at their most vulnerable.
I'll never stop seeing how strong people really are, and I'll never stop working to help them feel stronger and healthier.
And we'll never stop helping medical professionals see patients in vivid new ways. Because you never stop, we'll never stop. We'll never stop advancing healthcare IT through image analytics and visualization technologies. Using our image technology expertise, we're designing healthcare IT systems to provide rapid access to extremely high-quality images, giving doctors the chance to analyze patient information and collaborate with colleagues in revolutionary new ways. And looking to the future, as the volume of clinical data continues to grow, we'll keep advancing IT systems that help healthcare access, analyze, share, and transmit vast amounts of information, all of which will be critical to the future of patient treatment and medical coordination. Because we'll never stop improving the future by building on over 80 years of creating value from innovation to help develop a brighter, healthier future for all. Never stop advancing healthcare IT. FujiFilm, value from innovation.
Welcome to Adaptive Radiography. My name is Dennis Bowman, and hopefully you've seen me before and already heard my intros because I'm not going to really spend any time telling you about myself again, other than to say that when I first became a speaker, I had a talk that was about positioning, and it was called something like Positioning Tips and Tricks or Positioning Tricks of the Trade. I had all these different titles for it. And then I was lucky enough to meet this guy who became a good friend of mine, and we co-authored a book together. And his name was Quinn Carroll. And he already had the book going, but he wanted all kinds of tips and tricks of the trade and that kind of thing. And that was exactly what I had. So we joined forces and we created this book called Adaptive Radiography with Trauma, Image Critique, and Critical Thinking. And the main thing that's different about our book was you have the main positioning books. Like in America, we have Merrill's and Bontrager, and they tell you how to do it. But as we all know, there's a lot of times you can't do that for whatever reason, right? They're hurt, they're just unable to move that body part for whatever reason, and you now need to adapt. Or there's just a better trick of the trade of how to do it than the way that those books told you how to do it. That's what our book has, and I've just taken some of my favorite parts of that and then a few other little things that never made it into the book and created this talk for you here today. This first part is really more for students than radiographers, because radiographers have probably already got their way of doing it, but students might not have got this together yet and figured this part out, and that is getting the part perfectly centered. And the way to do it is you start exactly where the book tells you to start. Go center there. Just know that you should never think that just because you got there, it's perfect and now you get to end there. It's a great place to start, just not necessarily a great place to end. You need to double check in that all four sides of your collimated field are perfect. If all four sides are perfect, then yes, that's the place, that was the place. If they're not all perfect, that's not the place. So the way I would do it is I would just create a light field box and then start moving my patient around in that box. And then again, if all four sides are perfect, it's perfect. And it looks something like this, where I would put my hands up against the body part. And here's the perfect, way to do it, where you can do all three sides of it. So you can, and I do a 1/2 inch collimation. That's how much I'd give myself extra past the body, which is 1 finger. So just, light field out there, a light just by my thumbs, light there, and then you have to decide where do you want the fourth, line to be. Do you want it mid-chin? Do you want all the chin on there? Do you want it right across her lips? So let's say you wanted it across her lips. Okay, well then that collimated field is too open. So you're going to close it a little bit, but half of whatever this is. So if you say from there to there is an inch, then you're not you'd collimate, right? You'd collimate that inch out of it, but now all of a sudden, with that you're cutting off part of the top of the head. So now you have to move them a little bit, and you have to move them so that the light again goes to there. So that's the thing where it's always, you're always moving the body around inside that light field. So then once you do that, again, you're going to have that thumb of light there, light field, finger there, that part never changed, but now you will have the light just going across the lips. So that's how you're always doing it. A lot of time it's changing your collimation and then moving your patient around. So this is the double coconut experiment. And it's going to be all about showing you free air and air fluid levels and how those change when you change the body and angle the body and or angle your tube. So when I talk about Bucky, I'll be talking about coconuts. It'll make sense when I show you this. So here we have two different coconuts on the, this is a table, the fluoro table that can go down and back up again. So right now it's straight up and down. And we have the one coconut right up against it with the right marker. And that one is 16.5 centimeters from the IR. And then we have this one against the garbage can, so it's further out. It's 24 centimeters out. And we did the distances so that it would be like a large patient and their small intestines, where some of it's further back, some of it's out further. And so, you're just getting different angles on, the different angles because they're further or closer. That's why there's two. So this perfect shot's coming straight across now. Tube is at 90, everything's parallel. You get the perfect air fluid levels. Now we put a 5-degree caudate angle. Patient's still straight up and down, but the angle's coming in at 5, and you can see it's no longer a perfect line. At 10 degrees, it's noticeably not perfect, and at 15 degrees, it's not good at all. Now you could still say, well, I can still totally see there's an air fluid level. Yeah, but we're looking at a coconut half full of fluid. How about if it was a small intestine with just a little tiny bit of fluid, or a sinus with a little bit of fluid, or something like that? And then you can go, hey, that much distortion, that could also just disappear it. Now we're going to angle up. So this is 5 degrees cephalad, and you can see that's not as bad as the caudate was. But now at 10 degrees, it's getting bad, and at 15 degrees, it's noticeably not good. Now we're angling both. And this is what we used to do at the hospital I worked at, was we would angle, if the patient, if you did like an abdomen series, and you had them supine, and then you stood the table up, and as you got all the way up, they're like, oh, I don't feel good, I could fall. Then we would like backing you down, and then you'd back them down 15 or 20 degrees. Well, then we would take our tube, and we would just angle it 15 or 20 degrees so that we were still parallel with the patient. And we did that until one day when a radiologist walked by and saw it, and went, what are you doing? And the tech said, I'm staying parallel. And he went, don't do that, because then we don't see the air fluid level as well, or air fluid and or free air. And so, so we, heard what he said, but it was like, is he right? I don't remember ever reading this before anywhere. So we did this experiment to prove either he's right or he's wrong, and he was absolutely right, and now I'm going to show you why. So here's what we were doing, right? The patient's back 5, so we're at 5. But you can see already it's distorting it. At 10, it's noticeably distorting. And at 15 degrees with the tube and 15 degrees with the patient, it's just as bad as when the tube was parallel. I mean, it was when the patient, when you were angling at 15 degrees. So, and it didn't matter that doggone it! Okay, coconut, blew it. Fifteen degree. So now here we are at 15 degrees back with the patient, coconuts, 15 degrees with the tube, and you can see that it is noticeably distorted. Not good. And it's kind of similar, it's not even similar, it's almost exact to when the patient was straight up and down and the tube was at 15. It was that distorted. But here's perfect. So this is what needs to happen. And this is what the radiologist said to do, which was, it doesn't matter where your patient's at, your tube needs to be parallel with the floor. And why is that? Well, you can imagine right now, like right now, this little drink I've been drinking, if this was clear and you would see the fluid level in there, right? And if I angled it like this, the fluid is still going to stay parallel with the floor. Fluid doesn't care what the patient's doing, right? It's always going to stay parallel with the floor. And because of that, your tube needs to be parallel with the floor, and then you're coming straight across your air fluid level. And that is why, no matter what the patient does, your tube needs to be parallel with the floor. I showed this image in one of my other talks, and this was about when we were talking about doing upright abdomens that we do with them PA instead of AP. The thing I didn't mention in this image is this. See this little sliver there? That's free air sitting right underneath the diaphragm. Well, you can imagine how distorted that air fluid level looked, right, when we were putting that 15-degree caudate on it. So here's that same thing, right? The person's up 15 or 20 off of straight up. You put a 15 to 20 degree caudate angle on it, and you distort everything out. You could literally disappear this free air right there. Or here on a Waters view, you can see that, here's the perfect sinus, or, a nice open sinus. And here there is some kind of a level going on there. It might not just be pure fluid because it's not a perfect line, but it's still a fluid and some version of fluid in there. And then that's again, right? Let's say the patient, you got to put the patient like that to do a Waters. And let's say they have a bad neck and they can't, and they can only get to here. So then you're like, what am I going to do? Well, some radiographers would angle the tube, and then that would still make it be where the Petrus ridges are below. But you have now distorted out, and you might be doing something, disappearing an air fluid level. So on anything that you're ever looking for air fluid levels, you really do not want to be angling your tube. Definitely. So what's the trick? Let's say they really can't lift their chin up, and you don't want to angle your tube. Well, the trick is turn them around AP, and then in the chair, make sure it's a chair that's actually got a back to it, and they can lean back in that chair, and that'll just take their whole body going back. So then they still lift their chin as high as they can, and the rest of it's done with their body, and you can still get the perfect angle. Now you're putting their sinuses further away, so that's not as good, but whatever. It's still way better than putting an angle on your tube. So, that is the great trick of the trade, is to do an AP Waters. This is Billy, and Billy was a true, real bone skeleton. And we'd had him at the hospital way before I got there. I think they bought Billy when they made the hospital. And so he'd been around for 50 years. And you can see he's fallen apart. But it was great to be able to use him when we wanted to do experiments. And we definitely wanted to on this thing with ribs that we were about to do. So all of our students every semester have to give a presentation on some body part. And one of the times our student, and I was the clinical instructor for all of our students, so I heard all these presentations. And so she gave it on anterior ribs. So you're doing it PA because you're putting the anterior ribs as close as possible to your image receptor. And then she's now giving her talk on, what are we seeing? And she goes, okay, so these ribs that you see really well are the posterior ribs. And then the ribs that you don't see very well at all are the anterior ribs. And I'm like, nah, I don't think that's right. And she goes, no, it's right. And I go, I don't think so, because that's why we actually pick AP or PA, is that, it's one of the few times so that we can get the body part as close as possible so that we see it the best. And she goes, yeah, I know all that, but whatever, it's still, those are the PA, those aren't the anteriors. So I go, well, let's get Billy out and just prove this. So we took Billy, and I'll go through this whole craziness of a picture, but we put these BBs on. So we have these little BBs that we actually put on ribs for when you're doing a rib series, so the radiologist knows kind of where to center their eyes and look at where the person hurts the most. And so we took a bunch of those and we put them on, so we spaced them out on the posteriors and we put them really close together on the anteriors. And then right at mid-coronal, we have that line going up and down so that you would know when a posterior ended and an anterior began. If you can somehow get your eyes to not notice all of the crazy metal in there and just look at those two images, you can see that they're almost identical. It doesn't matter if you're AP or you're PA. What you're seeing the best is the posteriors. And the ones you're not seeing as well are the anteriors. Well, I was lucky enough to be able to go to a conference and speak to Phil Ballinger, who was the editor or the first author of Merrill's for like 30 years. And I got to ask him about it and go, hey, how come it doesn't seem to matter if they're AP or they're PA, you just see the posterior ribs better? And he goes, well, they're thicker and they're less curved. So it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter which way you put them, AP, PA, you're going to just see the posterior ribs better. So the student was totally correct. I was absolutely wrong. And for all these years, like 30 years of being a radiographer, I had been thinking I was looking at the wrong ribs half the time. So it's a good thing I wasn't the radiologist reading them, because I didn't know the difference between AP, the anteriors and posteriors. So there you have it. It's that. That is the posterior rib. That is the anterior rib on a PA shot. So this is how you do it, right? You put the patient up against there. You collimate side to side so that you got light, past obviously the outermost rib, light just into the spine, so you got it all on the back, on the posterior side. By the time it gets to anterior, it'll have diverged, so for sure you're going to get sternum on the front. And then you leave that full 17 open so that you're planning on getting some lower ribs below the diaphragm. And it's going to look like that. So again, here are the posteriors. So let's say the person fell down, hit some coffee table or something right on these upper ribs. So way up high, up here is where they're hurting. So you go kind of right in this area. And it's obviously anteriors where they're hurting. Now you look and you go, okay, now these are fantastic posterior. And the anterior, like there's anterior, there's anterior, there's anterior, there's anterior. So you go, we can kind of see them all right. Scapula's a little bit in the way, but whatever. We sort of see it. Nothing like the posterior. And then you do an oblique. Now, what oblique do you do? Well, our place actually does both obliques, but most places only do one oblique. And the oblique they do is the oblique that will take the spine and move it away from the affected ribs. So it's left ribs that you want. So you're going to do an RAO to move this rib cage out of the way of these ribs. And this is what it's going to look like. So then you can still see, we're going to see a lot of posterior and not a lot of anterior. So here's a lot of posterior. And then, posteriors are fantastic, but you go anterior, kind of. I don't even see it barely. I guess that's it. And then most places would then do a lower AP rib shot, and that would be it. And you go, man, when did you ever really see a good anterior rib? And the answer is you didn't, unless you do both obliques. So if you do the other oblique, where you're now putting the spine into the affected side, which means that the spine, so now here are your anteriors, right? So you can see they're coming all the way across. Well, then this part of the spine is superimposing the ribs that you want to see. So you're not seeing all the ribs because you've got a spine in the way. But except for that part, at least for the first time, you're elongating out the ribs that you actually care about. And it looks like this. So these big, beautiful ribs right here, those are the anteriors. Now, do they go all the way across? Yes, they do. So are you missing this part of it? Yes, you are. but you're not missing any of this part of it. And this is better looking than anything we've seen, you know, which is why for anterior ribs, your routine should be both obliques. For posterior ribs, you don't need to do both because everything shows up a good posterior rib anyway. So this is just the LPO to show that you can't collimate. So this is for the students really, to show them, because most of my students all hated doing ribs, and I realized over the years that part of the reason they hated them, one is that they didn't do very many of them, and two, they couldn't really picture how you're collimating and what's going on. So here, you know, if you're doing an LPO, so it has nothing to do with this anterior rib story I was telling about. Now we're just into LPO, upper ribs. And you can't just go from sternum to, you know, the outermost part of the ribs, because you need to get, you know, a rib cage is sternum all the way to spine, right? So you have to imagine where is their spine. And then this light field has to, by the time it diverges, it has to be there. That's how far, you know, that's the perfect shot, is that you have to get the ribs on, you know, the spine on, and you'd love to not get anything more than the spine on. So in a way, you're sort of guessing it, of how thick are they, how much divergence is going through them to get to, you know, the perfect spine back there. Here you can see, you know, that it's showing too much, because it looks almost like we're doing a bilateral rib. But you can also see that on an LPO, it, you know, totally opens up the posterior ribs, and it foreshortens the anterior ribs. So it's a great looking oblique of it. You know, the perfect collimation would have been like right there. So that's the dream shot if you're shooting, you know, to have your perfect collimation. Like that. Now you're talking. That's exactly what we want to see. And here's an RPO. Now an RPO, you are putting the spine into the side, you know, the spine's now in the affected side. So we know we got the spine. So there you do just need to have light just go to the sternum, or the middle of the sternum, let's say, and then have light just skimming the outermost ribs here, and then that's your collimation. So where's the centering? Again, there is no centering. It's just you got that collimated field, light field there, that collimated field right where you want it there. Hey, the center's wherever the center is. Here again, you wouldn't love that because it's showing that's like a bilateral rib. Here it's pretty good. You know, ultimately perfect would have been like another solid inch of collimation there, let's say. That would have been the perfect shot. And even there we could have collimated another, you know, 3/4 of an inch in. But there you can see that, you know, this is a tangential view. And that's what our radiologists love. That's why we always did both obliques, because they love seeing that lateral border. And this is such a beautiful shot of the lateral border of ribs. And then our AP lower shot, you know, all you need is, you have to get diaphragm on, right? Because what is a lower rib? And a lower rib is all ribs below the diaphragm. And then how are you breathing them? Well, it should be on full expiration, so that the diaphragm is as high as possible, which is giving you as much low rib as possible, you know, as many ribs underneath that diaphragm as possible. So where do you know, where's the diaphragm? You know, all you need is diaphragm to crest, you know, maybe 1 inch below the crest. So his crest is kind of right there. Now, if if you feel yourself and you just go, where's your ribs, and where's your lower ribs, and where's your crest? And like right now, my ribs almost touch my crest. There's no area there. So I'm like short-waisted is what people would call me. Some people have a long waist and you go, wow, there's a bunch of room in there, you know? So everybody's a little different, but that's why if they got a lot of room, you just need light to the top of the crest. If they have no room, like me, maybe get 1 inch of crest on the shot, and then you just have to sort of guess where do you believe that diaphragm is. but these are the perfect shots, right? Here's the one where there's almost no crest. Here's like a full inch, inch plus of crest. And this one didn't need it because they weren't right on it. And this one wasn't on either. So both of these patients are sort of long-waisted, let's say. But again, we're getting, just that there's diaphragm with a little above, diaphragm with a little above. So that's the perfect shot for both of them. Now, how well do you see below the diaphragm ribs? It's kind of luck of the draw. It depends on, is there air in there to see through? How dense are they? Just all these different factors will factor into how well you see them. But at least you're getting it on there, and then from then on, it's luck of the draw of how well they show up. Here's a great sternum trick. So for those of you that saw my big long talk, you've already heard the sternum, which is why I won't tell the whole sternum story again with that I'm the sternum master, but I will show you how to do a sternum for all of you that haven't seen this trick. And what you're going to do is you're going to pretend you're doing an AP sternum. So you're going to put an inch of light above and below the manubrium and the xiphoid, and then you're going to move them out of the way, and you're going to make sure that your bucky or your detector or whatever it is back here is all perfectly centered up. You put your marker on, either a right or a left. You bring them back over. You turn them into that gentle little 20-degree oblique, because there's no such thing as a PA sternum, because that would just be a sternum with a spine over it. So you've got to move that spine out of the way. So you just do that. You feel their sternum, and wherever you feel their sternum is, you make sure it's right over that line, and then you just go shoot it. Don't turn your light on, because if you turn your light on, it's going to look like a light somewhere in their back. Which is why if you look at the textbooks of how you're supposed to do a sternum, all they say is exit mid-sternum, which is not really that helpful. So this way is just awesome. It's going to work every time. It is centered. Again, you don't want to turn that light on because you'll almost always go and open up the light field because you won't believe that little light field is going to do it, but it is going to do it because you've already proven it by doing that AP version of it. And then, there's your sternum. And for those of you that remember my whole sternum master story, how often do they come out this nice? Not that often, because it really just depends. They got to just have a perfect density sternum and perfect density lungs and perfect density heart, and if they have all that, then yes, you get to have a really great looking sternum. And if they don't, which this patient sort of does, but it's not that great, it's all up to the patient. It's not really up to you, but at least you're getting it centered by doing it the way I just showed you with the AP. Now, how much does a scapula move is what we're going to talk about now. So, again, remember how this is how you do an AP scapula, right? So in the AP, arms over and up like that, so that the scapula is parallel with your IR, which is your image receptor. Going to take a quick little hit here. And it looks like this. So here's your scapula. And you can see that, half of it's sort of in the lung field, half of it is not. Now, when we do a chest x-ray, what do you do with their shoulders? And you roll them forward, right? So now, just sitting in your chair right now, do that. Just let your arms hang down like you would for a PA chest patient, and then roll your shoulders forward so that you can feel those scapulas start to go. And so we say that when you do that, it was about 25 to 30 degrees of oblique is what's going on. And a lot of it's going to depend on just how, much movement do you have in your shoulders and stuff. But we're going to say the average patient, 25 to 30 degrees of oblique is what's going on. And it looks like this. So now, almost, most of it's outside of the ribs, but you still see there's some superimposed. But how do you really do a PA, scapula? And the way you do it is you don't just roll them forward. You roll them forward and then you bring that arm across and put it on the other shoulder. So now do that and feel what happens. Roll your scapula forward like the first one, and now take your arm and put it on your other shoulder. Or just let your arm hang and just bring it across and feel what your scapula is doing. And you can feel like, whoa, that's really moving, isn't it? So now we're going to say that's another 25 to 30 degrees. So now we're at 50 to 60. And it looks like this, which is starting to look like a badly done lateral. You know, the borders, it's now out of the rib cage, but it's certainly not a perfect lateral yet. But if it is 50 to 60, which it is, then how much do you need to oblique their body to get a perfect lateral? And the answer is, well, if it was 50, they need to go 40 degrees. And if it was 60, they need to go 30 degrees. And that's the only bit of oblique you need to do to get them into a lateral. So there you can see that's exactly what we've done. We've rotated them 30 to 40 degrees. And now there's your perfect lateral scapula with the humerus coming straight across. Now, that is completely different than when you're doing a shoulder series and you want the humerus, you want a lateral scapula in it, right? It's a PA scapular Y view, but you're doing it for a shoulder, not for a scapula. So at that point, the only thing that's the same is they both have a lateral scapula in it. But how you're doing it is completely different. You're not bringing that arm up and across like that. The arm's kind of hanging down because you're not caring about the body of the scapula. You're now caring about the whole top part of the scapula, and that's the part you want to see. And that's where people get mixed up. So a lot of people, they do the same amount of oblique for their scapula as they do for their shoulder Y view. So here, the humerus is vertical. Here, we'll show you in this picture. The humerus is just kind of hanging down, and it's basically a 45-degree oblique is what you're doing. So depending on how well you can see them, you either see them better back here and you go, that's a 45-degree oblique, or you're better looking in the front and you go, that's the 45. I could see that there. I've seen people take a 45-degree cushion and actually put it up in there, or a sponge, not a cushion, but a sponge, either in the front or in the back to just say, okay, that's what 45 is. Yes, they are at 45. And then this is what you're dreaming about seeing. So here you can see you got a perfect lateral scapula, but you got a humerus right over it, right? So if you were shooting this for a scapula where you're looking for an actual fracture in a scapula, this would be terrible, which is why for a scapula, the humerus is going straight sideways. For a Y view, it's going down because you're looking for this is the area that you're actually caring about, as opposed to that for the scapula. So again, they both have a perfect lateral scapula in them, but that's the only thing similar about them. So don't get them mixed up. This is a long PA wrist, centering just proximal to the styloid process, and it shows about a third to a half of the forearm. A lot of radiographers would say this is showing too much. It's half of a forearm, right? The other half of us would say in a trauma situation, you need to always go long because you never know. If it's somebody you're looking for arthritis or something like that, you're not looking for a fracture, yeah, no reason to go long. So this is what it would look like. This is a long wrist. This would be a short wrist for like arthritis. This is back in the day when we could do, CR could do 4-on-1s. Film could certainly do 4-on-1s where, there's your PA, your oblique, your lateral, and we also did a navicular shot. So again, for arthritis, perfect. For trauma, not as perfect. So I had this kid, he was 15 years old, and he was skateboarding, fell down, comes in, and the doctor orders a wrist, but the kid's like, okay, well, what do you want me to do? And I'm like, well, whatever I do, it doesn't really matter because you don't have a fractured wrist. Even though, again, there's no such thing as a wrist, right? No radiologist is going to read out, fracture of the wrist. it's going to be a fracture of one of these bones in this area, and this whole area is called a wrist. But whatever. The kid was moving his hand all over the place, and it's like, okay, well, there's no fracture there, but whatever. So even though I always go long, on this kid I decided, why even radiate that much arm? That's just ridiculous, because he doesn't have a fracture there. But the ER doc sees right there where this blue line is. He sees this little thing right there. And even though it just looks like it's intermedullary, it doesn't look like anything to me. It did to him. And he went, just give me a forearm. In case I blew it in order, I should have ordered a forearm. So I do the forearm. That's the kid's forearm. That's why you're supposed to go long. That's why it doesn't matter what body part, whether it's a knee, an ankle, a wrist, an elbow. If if it's a trauma, don't do a short little thing, because it could just be that the patient doesn't hurt where the fracture is. They hurt somewhere near it, There's 8 billion people out there. There's so many differences in how people are affected by pain or whatever, And so you never know. That's why you should always go long when it's a trauma situation. This is about the ASIS, which in the book, we called it the Universal Landmark. So when you're just doing positioning of things, pelvises and hips and just whatever, and you're down there and you're and the symphysis pubis is something that you would want to use, but you don't really want to get down there and start feeling for it. Instead of going down there and feeling for it, you can use the bottom of the ASIS instead. So the ASIS, right? So the bottom of the ASIS is located 3 inches above the upper edge of the symphysis pubis. And the bottom of the ASIS is also located 3 inches below the top of the crest. So it's this kind of perfect centered thing. So here we go. Here's the ASIS right here, and this is the very bottom of it. And it's basically 3 inches down to here, which is right at the top of the symphysis pubis. And it's 3 inches up here to get to the top of your crest. So it's this perfect place a perfect thing to be able to use when you don't want to be feeling down here, So that's just a great one. Oh, that's funny. So I've taken its talks from different things, and so this one obviously had something set into it where it's like it slowly will materialize the image in there. It's like, what? So like when I first started being a speaker, I must have thought, that's cool, let's do that. And then over the last 20 years I realized, not that cool, don't do that. But somehow this is still built into these slides. So wild. That was fun. So I probably in the next couple will have that too. So this is about portable chests. And when you shoot a portable chest, obviously patients can be at all kinds of different angles, right? Well, that means you're going to be at all kinds of different angles to match them. So this is one of those ones where you're not shooting it for free air or air fluid levels. You're shooting it to just have it be so that it's not a elongated or foreshortened chest. It's a perfect looking chest. That's your goal. Which is why when you're doing like an abdomen series, and our abdomen series is a chest, AP or PA chest, a supine abdomen, and an upright abdomen. Now, if they can't do a PA chest, then you're going to do an AP chest, right? And if they can't do an upright abdomen, then you're going to do a decube abdomen. And so when you start getting into like doing a decube abdomen, then how well are you really seeing the diaphragm and for free air and all that? And then you're thinking, well, I want to see it on that chest. I'll see it on the chest x-ray. Yeah, but you got all kinds of angle on your chest x-ray. So you might have just disappeared your air fluid and free air on that. So then that really makes a difference of how well you're shooting that decube or your upright abdomen. So it's something to always be aware of, when you're counting on your chest, but your chest was sort of not for that, right? And it isn't for that. That's secondary to this because you have to angle. There's no other way around it. You have to pretty much match their sternum is what you're going for here. So now I'll get rid of that line. So the most important thing to note is that the angle of the patient really means what's the angle of their sternum. It's not the cassette or your detector or whatever's back there. It's not their spine, it's their sternum. That you want to look at their sternum, and that whatever angle their sternum is, that's the angle you want to match. And how are you going to match it? Well, you got to be 72 inches away, and then you got to be at the perfect height so that it matches, right? That's the angle. That's how you figure out what your angle is, and that's how you're going to figure out how high you go with your tube, is that. So with the bed all the way up, which is this bed, and then we've got the detector behind their back, and then we've got one solid pillow back behind it, and then there's another pillow, a couple pillows for her head, but there's one pillow behind that cassette detector that you can't see anymore. We call this 70 degrees, and it's 70 degrees, you know, this angle you're seeing there. And I used to teach my students, you know, with the bed at a normal height, and, you know, most beds are at a certain height, and if the bed's at a certain height, then your tube is going to basically be sort of right around your face. And it was a whole thing of that's the average. Then you just have to fine tune it and go, nah, I still need a little bit more, a little bit less. Here, if you had like a kyphotic patient that's kind of bent over, and you look and you go, man, what's their sternum doing? And you go, man, their sternum is like straight up and down here. Well, then your tube should be parallel to the floor and coming straight across, because that's the angle you're matching, is straight up and down. And the goal here really is to have an AP chest that looks as similar to a PA chest as you can get it. You know, with a couple of fingers of lung above the top of the clavicle. That's the perfect, you know, when you got that, you nailed it. If you got a lot up there, you got too much angle. You know, if you got barely anything up there, you didn't have enough angle. So, you know, this is what's perfect. So if you're not really sure what perfect is, start looking at a bunch of PHS, and that'll get your eyes to look, okay, that's what I'm shooting for every time I do an AP chest. This is the Clements-Nakayama method, and it's for hips. And it's this cool thing. So it's a modified axiolateral cross-table projection. And it's for a patient that can't move. So the patient's fallen, has a potentially broken hip, but the other hip is also hurt. It might not be hurt enough that they want you to do both hips. It's just bad enough that they can't move it. It doesn't have to be hurt. It just can't be moved for whatever reason. So they can't move the unaffected side. And so what are you going to now do? Because they can't lift it up and get it out of your way. You're going to come in with two angles is basically what's going to happen. So you're going to be 30 to 45 degrees superior, which means coming in at the angle that you normally come in when you're just doing a cross-table lateral hip. And then you're also going to put a 15 to 25 degree angle downwards towards the floor. So that's the second angle. So this is with 15 degrees. So we got the patient, you know, so we got that 30 to 45 degree thing going on already. And now we're angling down towards the floor at 15 degrees. And the knee is in anatomic position, meaning that the knee's straight up, which they aren't usually if they have a broken hip. It's usually kind of flopped out there, right? This one is 20 degrees down towards the floor. This one's 25 degrees down, and you can see that it just got better and better, right? This one still has a lot of superimposition over the pelvis. This one's getting better, and this one's like, now you're talking. So the 25 degree is really the winner for sure. And then this is what it looks like when their hip really is flopped out. So it's the difference between that's anatomic, that's not. Again, that's not going to have anything to do with you. That's just them, and they can't move it. It's obviously a potentially fractured hip. So you're certainly not having them move that leg at all. So this was a patient that came in who had fallen down at home, fallen forward, you know, lands on their face and stomach, and then the paramedics come, they're that way, and they're like, well, we're not going to flip you over because we're almost for sure you've got a dislocated hip and or fractured hip. So we're going to pick you up the way you are. We're going to bring you to the hospital the way you are. And when they got to the x-ray department, they were still on their stomach. and the tech took this view, and then there it is. Okay, so it's dislocated. Is it dislocated anterior or posterior? Well, that's why we need a cross table so we can see that. So now this is how it's going to play out. This room is one of these rooms where the bucky, of which we could put the detector inside, can angle, and the tube obviously can angle, and the table is a movable table, which most tables are not, right? You obviously can't angle the bucky this way. So if you're trying to get that 45-degree angle that you would want for doing like a cross-table lateral hip, you can't use this, but you could move the patient 45 degrees because, again, that table is on wheels and it moves around. But right now we just have the patient parallel with the tube, and it's at an angle at 20 degrees just to match this 20 degrees because, again, we're not looking for air fluid levels, so we don't care about everything can be angled now. And then this is what it looks like. So then we shot, that's a real patient. This is our phantom. And now we're going to shoot that phantom. And it looks just like that. And you go, well, that's pretty cool. Like that would work right there without anything else, without any other angles. That's still a cool looking shot, You're not seeing up through the neck like you normally would if you were coming up at that angle. But still, that's pretty cool without anything. Now this is angling the patient. So now we've angled the patient out 30 degrees, and we've put 20 degrees on the tube again and 20 degrees on the bucky. And then this is how we would do it if you weren't in a room that actually had this system and it can't do this angling, and you're like, okay, well then I can just use my own cassette, that. So then we would just do that. So that's just its own cassette in a cassette holder, and we're still coming up at that angle. Now we're at 45 degrees to the patient instead of that one was 30, degrees with the patient just being tweaked over. Here now, the patient's just straight, but we've put all the angles on it with the tube. So either way, you can angle your tubes and or not, depending on what kind of room you got. Here we're just coming in with that angle now, like we did with the first one, where the body's at 30 degrees. This thing's over at 20. This is at 20. And it looks like that. There's your right hip. There's your left hip. And again, that was kind of legs away from the tube. This one now is just doing it the opposite oblique, or the opposite angle, let's say, where we're putting the head away, feet are closer, and then we're just doing it with the phantom, and it looks like that. So you can see that, it's not as good as far as elongating the head. So the other one was better. The other one's really the way to go. So this was that patient again that had that dislocated hip, and so she went and did the the modified PA Clemens Nakayama, and there it is. So there you can just see that the person's over on their stomach, right? So this is their stomach here and their back there, so we can see it was posteriorly dislocated. So super cool thing to know. And again, if she would have just come in straight on it, it still would have showed it, you can't come in straight across. You have to have that down angle to get the two sides not on top of each other. And then the last thing I want to just talk about is how you would figure out techniques. So this would be one that it could have been in my big technique, in my big digital talk that I gave for sure, of just how you can start to figure out your techniques. And so this is whether you are a student who's just learning it or you've been a tech for 20 years, but now you have these new techniques, right? So if you've always known your other techniques and now you're willing to go to these higher KVs and lower masses, you're either going to be doing the 15% rule and cutting the mass in half and all this stuff, or, which if your brain can go to that kind of math, then that's good for you. It's nice and easy. But if your brain doesn't do that, which most brains don't, then you really have to just learn techniques again. So the greatest way to learn it is I used to call it the photo timer technique game, but then all instructors came up to me and went, there hasn't been a photo timer in like 20 years, man. So they're all called AECs. It's like, okay. So it's the AEC technique strategy is what you can also call it. Doesn't matter what you call it. But it's the way to learn your techniques. So what you're going to do is you're just going to make the exposure. So you got your patient on the table, you got everything set up, boom, you make your exposure. You have to look at that exposure index number, and you have to make sure it's good. So again, going back to that whole talk I gave, so that has to be there, and it has to be in the zone you want it to be in. So whatever range you've decided you want, you go, that is a good number. And the image comes up and you go, that was good collimation, it was good centering, it was a good number. That's a good technique. Okay. Then you go back out to your patient, and now you have someone laying on your table or standing by your bucky or whatever. They're right in there. And they are the exact size for that technique. So now you know, hey, 85 kV at 40 mass is exactly that big, and go up and feel them and go, that's what a shoulder, 85 at 7 mass is that big, or a knee is that big, or a C spine or an L spine or an abdomen or whatever. It's that big, it's that solid. And actually spend a couple more seconds. So it's not going to speed you up, but hey, you're learning how to technique really well. So it's not supposed to speed you up. It's a learning process thing. It's only going to take you a couple seconds, but you're going to go, that's what 85 at 10 looks like. That's what 85 at 45. That's what 100 at 12. That's what 65 at 920 looks like, And you go, okay. And you do that for a week or so. Now, after you've done it enough, you just go, I think I'm kind of ready to start techniquing. Okay. Now you're ready to play this technique game. And the game is, you're not allowed to make an exposure until you've made the call of what the mass is. Now, you're not setting up the mass. You're not setting up a manual technique. You're still using the AEC, but you're pretending that you're not. So, you're still going to make hey, it's going to be 85 at 16. Boom, make the exposure and look at it. And it was 85 at 18. And you go, wow, that's super close. And then the EI number was right. The collimation, everything was good. You go, man, that was super close. Or it was 32. And you go, well, I said 16, so I was half of 32, Now, if 32 was supposed to, if 32 is right, then, your 16 would have been modelly. And so you would have been underexposed. But maybe it's the other way around, And so, hey, you're double what it should have been, whatever. You don't care. All you care about is that you're making the call, and then you're seeing what's coming up, and then you're learning from it. And so then finally, when you do need a technique, or you're just going to look and go, man, I think I could technique better than the AEC. The AEC seems to always kind of go in the range, but it's more in the higher end of the range. And I want to be at the lower end of the range. So I can actually technique better than the AEC, in which case you should tell your boss, because that means that really you should have a field engineer come in and that they can cut things in there and make it be that way. And you should, because then you're right. You are over radiating patients for no reason. But still, when you do portable work and all that kind of go to the OR and the ER and you're just doing portable mobile work, you are going to feel so much more secure, because now you really are, totally on your game when it comes to techniquing, even though you didn't technique. So I played this game for, my entire career. I never stopped doing it, because it just always kept me up on the latest techniques. And we changed techniques so much at our place, because we went from CR to DR, and we had gadolinium DR, then we had cesium DR, and then we got to change our techniques and cut that mass in half. And so there was just always so many changes that even though I used to be really good at techniquing, then it was like, man, what is the latest number? So I'm always paying attention to keep me as up on it as I could, for sure. And with that, we got so you see that your exposure is correct, which I have been saying, so forgot that I hadn't made that last click. And now we have the birds with the smiley face, which means I am done. So thank you very much. It was my pleasure giving this talk. And now hopefully you guys have some questions. If not, I guess then we will just be done. Okay, thanks.
Tuberculosis claimed a total of 1.4 million lives worldwide in 2019. Even though an estimated 60 million lives were saved through TB diagnosis and treatment between 2000 and 2019, tuberculosis remains a global epidemic. According to the World Health Organization, of about 10.4 million new TB cases in 2015, only 6.1 million were detected, leaving a gap of 4.3 million undetected cases. Gaps in testing for tuberculosis and reporting new cases remain major obstacles in the road to a world free from TB. The obstacle appears because of geographical and transportation conditions along with being understaffed. Even though medical professionals are assigned to remote places, they can't do much to handle tuberculosis. Because medical equipment with crucial functions to detect tuberculosis are not suitable for geographical and transportation conditions. Then how to solve it? With FDR XR, from FujiFilm. It provides flexibility to healthcare professionals, as it can be taken anywhere, making it easier for health professionals to visit people with TB symptoms and help to detect it from an early stage. First things first. The patient's lungs are X-rayed with XR, which has advanced image processing technology with a low radiation dose. In a matter of seconds, the results can immediately be examined on a laptop that has been equipped with artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence technology can make the progress of tuberculosis screening easier. The image produced can be immediately analyzed by AI, by helping doctors diagnosing whether the patient has tuberculosis or not. Health professionals can share the images with the hospitals, and doctors can access them too for more accurate diagnosis and further treatment. With XR that is easy to carry and complete with the artificial intelligence. Workflow of health services in tuberculosis screening in remote areas, and earlier inaccessible locations. Become easier, faster, and more efficient.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for your very, very comprehensive talk for today's program. And we have quite a number of participants from all around the world. I can spot their names and location from America, Africa, from Middle East, all the way to East Asia. And if anyone from the audience has any question for Dennis, please let me know. You can just type on the chat box, and then I will just pass to Dennis. And I'm sure we will have more episodes with you for the exciting topics to come, right?
We do have some great ones coming.
Yeah. Well, I just want to ask you one question, because I know that you're a professional technologist. You've been working with different technology for all along. So at the moment, like for example, in my country, I'm based in Thailand. We kind of switch from CR to DR already. So what do you want to say to our technologists so that they can have in mind in terms of the technology change and what would affect our practice?
Well, I would say like one of the things that I think is the greatest about DR, and it is the greatest because your patient is still in position when you see the image. So if you know that you need to do a repeat, and it's not like in the old days where it's like, okay, now you had to remember, what did you do wrong? It was a positioning problem. And most of our repeats nowadays are positioning problems because the equipment's so good that even if you've over radiated, which is certainly not a good thing, it's still an image that's passable, where it wasn't in the film days, or even the CR. You know, as soon as we went digital, that changed. But just knowing that they're there, it really helps you be able to fix what your problem was because they're in the wrong position. So that part's great. But one of the things I found, at least in California, is that a lot of people would go out and fix it and do another one, even though the first one was good enough.
Okay.
It wasn't great. It wasn't anything you would brag about, but it was a passable image. And, but they just realized, hey, in 15 seconds, I can make a perfect image, of which you can, but now you are double radiating your patient. So it's not the whole ALARA thought thing where, as low a dose as we can do, that's not it, because you've just done a second one.
Yeah.
So I would say that. And then the other thing I was thinking about as I was watching this presentation today again, and which I think everybody kind of knows that I recorded it, so I didn't just give this thing live. I had a couple of shots at it. If I didn't like it, I could redo it again and make it, perfect there. But that thing that I really thought about was just the whole idea that in the film days, we would you do your work. Your work would be hanging in this place called the light room, and everybody would come in and everybody would see everybody's work all day long. So it held you, just that alone, knowing that you got a lot of people, not just the radiologist or whoever is at your facility reading your films, but all of your coworkers are seeing your work all day long.
True.
And that held you to a kind of a higher standard, because you wanted everybody to know that you're good, Well, and so that was part of it. But the other part that was really more important was you would see, I would see your work, and I would see how you just did a swimmers or whatever. And I realized, like, hey man, your swimmers is just better than mine, or you always get the odontoid and I don't, or something. So I need to talk to you because you're better than I am at that. And I want to be that good. And so we were always teaching each other, always, or it was a technique thing that, you would just see it. So whatever it was, I was seeing everybody's work and I knew who I respected and who I wanted to help me get better. And so we were always getting better because we were always teaching each other. Well, now we're all in our own little separate rooms and nobody sees anybody's work. So you have to really, on purpose, talk about it with each other, And so I think that that's one of the downsides. It's maybe the only downside of digital, is that we don't get to learn from each other as much anymore. And that's a real shame, because that is like this whole talk that I just gave. When I wrote this book with my friend Quinn, he had all the technical stuff, but he didn't have any of the tricks of the trade stuff, where I had an entire a huge presentation of that he saw me give, and he went, man, that's exactly what I want in this book. And that's why he asked me to join the book, and that's what I added to it. And so I have to say that probably 3 out of 4 tricks of the trade that I learned through my whole 40-year career, I learned from students. I didn't learn from techs, because I didn't really work with techs that much. I work with students, though, every single day. And the student just came from your facility, and there's 15 radiographers there that all have, let's say, 10 years of experience. Well, that's 150 years of experience that they're teaching these students. So these students would just come in with all these things that I've never heard of before or never seen before. And I was always somebody who's like, hey man, if you got a better way to do it than my way, then my way's out of here, I don't care if I've done it for 5 years or 40 years. I'm willing to switch immediately if you can show me a faster way to do something or a better way to do it that's going to just get it more often. So,
wow, what an experience. I'm teaching my student here also in my university. And what I found was that when technology changed, the teachers are the one who need to learn first, so that you can teach your own student. So a clinical attachment or clinical practice, you need to have it so that you can pass on to your next generation of the radiographers or the technologists. So thanks again for a very, very informative session with you, Dennis, and hope to see you again with this very, very interesting and very successful program in collaboration with FujiFilm. And for all the audience from around the world, you can also watch this on the pre-record on our Isrrt Facebook webpage. And if you have any question, you can always post there, or you have any comments about the topic that you want us to have the webinar on, you can always let us know. And for today, I would like to say goodbye, and you all have a nice day. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dennis.